am drinking some rosé today. This is a brand new find. This is Rioja, so it's a Spanish rosé. It's a 2, so for those of you who know me, I am obsessive over sugar content of wine because I love my wine. I drink it on the daily, and it needs to be low sugar so that it fits in with the way I eat. So this is a fantastic low sugar wine, rosé. It's a Rioja Spanish wine, and I think it was, oh my goodness, it wasn't expensive. It was like an $11.95 bottle, and it tastes delicious. So it's so beautiful out. It is a rosé night, which is super exciting. All right, so I'm gonna have a sip of this. We're gonna get over the wine break. We're gonna talk about macros because I know that's what you guys want to talk about. I know it's super, it's a hot topic right now, and I'm sure you want macros explained really well. So if you have questions on macros, please type them into the chat. I'm gonna keep an eye over here on my laptop so I can see what exactly is going on and answer those questions as they come in. So, macros. We tend to think of food traditionally as food groups. So we've been trained, all those things to look at food as food groups, right? So there's dairy, and there's grains, and there's meat and meat alternatives, and there's fruits and vegetables, and there's fats and oils, and all the things. So we've been really trained to have these food groups, and we need to have an X amount of servings of each food group a day, in order to be healthy and whatnot. But the problem with looking at it that way is that when we're talking about food groups, hi there, we've got a little friend. All right, Leighton, thank you. We're talking about macros. You know what macros mean? So that means this conversation is not for you. All right, off you go. So we're talking about food groups. Sorry, guys. This is what happens when you Facebook Live from your living room when your kids get home from baseball. So we don't do food groups in my world. I do not teach people to do food groups because food groups don't make any sense when it comes right down to it. The food groups all have different things in common, right? Which basically means that you don't have to have X amount of servings of grains or X amount of servings of dairy or all of these things. You need what's in those food groups to be healthy. So all food is made up of 3 things. Just three. It's made of 3 things. It's made of fat, it's made of protein, and it's made of carbohydrates. And those 3 things are macronutrients. So when you hear somebody talk about their macros or macronutrient balancing or, macronutrient percentages, it's really, really important to understand that they're just talking about carbs, they're talking about fat, and they're talking about protein. So when you think about it like that, it's not quite as confusing after all. So then we get into what are fat, what are carbs, what are protein, right? What is the characteristics of those things? What does that all mean? So basically, macronutrients are, they're categorized basically according to their chemical structure, right? So each macronutrient has a very specific chemical structure. We're not here to talk chemistry and biology tonight at all. What we're here to talk about is how it relates to eating. But it's important that you understand why they're classified. So it's not like, oh, grains are this and dairy is this, and because that's the classification. It's because the macronutrients that make up grains and meat and, apples and oranges, they basically follow a very specific chemical structure that either classifies as a fat, as a protein, or as a carbohydrate. And that's as technical as we're gonna get. So we're not gonna go crazy. So if you think about it that way, it makes it a little bit simpler, I hope. At least it always has made it simpler for me to look at it that way. And so food, because food is complex, and if you think about it, it's made up of different parts, right? So food is basically made up of different macronutrients. So some foods are very specifically one macronutrient, right? Like butter is basically a fat. All the molecules in butter are the same, and they are a fat, and that is that. But some foods are more complicated. So a good example would be beans and legumes. They have a lot of components that are the chemical structure of a carbohydrate, and then they have some that are a protein. So you have some protein and you have some carbohydrates in there. So for simplicity's sake, when we talk about macronutrients and we refer to food as either a fat, a protein, or a carb, we basically are talking about what the biggest percentage of macronutrient is in that food. So when it comes to, most beans and legumes, the biggest percentage is going to be the carbs, so we just call it a carbohydrate. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit more about other differences between the macronutrients because it's really important. So when we're talking about macronutrients, so we know now they're classified based on their structure. So that's how we classify it scientifically as a fat, a protein, or a carbohydrate. But when the important thing that you need to know that I want to teach you is that when they go into your bodies, they're responsible for different things and they do different things. And that's really, really important to understand, and we're going to explain that. First, we're going to have a little wine break because it's stressful when your daughter breaks into your office during Facebook Live and crawls around the floor and has to be removed, which is just what happened. If you guys caught that, not sure if you did. Wine break. Okay, so continuing on, let's talk about how the macronutrients act in your bodies, what makes them unique, what they're used for, and how we can use that information to help with fat loss and to help with getting energy and all of those things that you guys are looking to do. So let's start with fat. Fat is a pretty basic macronutrient. Most people are terrified of fat because we live in a fat-phobic society. You know, we've been trained that fat is bad and fat will make us fat and all these things, and that's not true. It's so far from true. In fact, new research basically has completely debunked the whole fat is bad myth. Fat is actually probably the best macronutrient when it comes to fat loss, which sounds counterintuitive, but it actually makes sense from a science standpoint, which we can get into later if you have questions, and we're still going. I haven't seen any questions come up so far, so I'm going to keep an eye on it and keep going. But let's talk about fat. So fat is the most calorie dense of the macronutrients, and this is probably where some of the fat phobia comes into play. And so what that means is that fat is more tightly packed with calories than carbohydrates and protein are, which means you eat smaller portions of fat to get the same, caloric bang as you would a larger portion of fat or protein. If you want to get specific, fat basically has 9 calories for every gram, whereas carbohydrates and protein only have 4 calories for every gram. So it is almost double, which is why it's so scary to people when they're counting calories. But again, calories don't matter. And that's, I'm not going to get into the whole calorie debate tonight because that's an entirely different Facebook Live. We're just talking about the macros, but suffice it to say that calories don't matter. I have done a Facebook Live on it before. If you're interested and you're curious and you want to know a little bit more about the science behind why calories don't matter, you can just go on to my Lavish Nutrition business page, do a search in the video section for calories and you'll come up with that. But anyway, side note. So with fat, it's very, very high in calories compared to protein and carbohydrates, which is fine. The other thing you need to know about fat is that fat digests very, very slowly. And this is really important when it comes to blood sugar and insulin and switching your body over from fat storage to fat burning, which is what we want to do when we're trying to lose weight. So when it comes to digesting fat, it takes a long time. Fat can take 3 or 4 hours to digest compared to carbs and protein, which are a lot faster than that. So I'm going to explain how that all comes together at the end when I give you guys an example and a scenario because I think that makes the most sense. But let's just suffice it to say that fat is packed with more calories per gram. Fat takes longer to digest and it has a very specific structure. Fat is used in a lot of different things in your bodies. It's really important to get fat into your diet because fat literally provides a base to build your hormones on. So if you are a woman and you are, experiencing things like increased fat storage, it's hard to lose weight, your energy's tanking, you have brain fog, all of these things, a lot of it comes down to balancing your hormones and making sure they're in the ideal ratio. And if you don't have enough fat in your diet, how on earth are you going to have balanced hormones? It's so, so important. We deal with issues with hormones all over the place. So that's definitely something to keep in mind when you look at whether or not you should be increasing the fat in your diet. The other thing fat is so important for, and I just talked about this tonight, and I was talking about it yesterday, and I feel like it just keeps coming up, but fat is, it builds your brain as well. You need fat in your brain in order to have everything move quickly and speedily and to transfer information and for you to think properly and clearly. So if you're following a low-fat diet, and you're experiencing brain fog and you feel like, you're forgetting names and you're just not there all the time, a lot of that is because your brain does not have enough of the brain-building fats that it needs. And so things start, just deteriorating, which is not good. So fat is very important for that. A little wine break. Fat is also really important for your skin. If you want to lubricate your skin, you have to do it from the inside out. And you need that layer of fat underneath it to provide that structure, that smoothness, all of those good things. So for those reasons, fat is very, very important to your diet. Fat is also important to your diet for things like satiety. So fat makes you feel full, and this comes down to fat having more calories per gram than carbohydrates or protein, right? So when you eat fat, it makes you feel full faster and it makes you feel full longer. And this is really, really important because fat is one of those things that helps to control our appetite and make sure we're not overeating. If you're not eating enough fat in your diet, if you're relying on fat-free foods where they're actually removing the fat and adding in carbohydrates and other sugar-based fillers, then you're actually removing that cue, that trigger that tells you that you're full and that you've eaten enough. And so it makes it very, very easy to overeat, which we don't want to do when we're trying to lose fat and gain energy. So fat is really important for those reasons. Took me a minute there as well. So what's a fat? Fat is found in animal foods and plant foods. So we have different types of fat. I don't know if we need to get into that tonight. Let me just see. Is there any questions coming through so far? I don't think so. I'm not seeing any questions. So I'm not going to get into all the different types of fat. However, it's important to note that the only type of fat you need to avoid, you want to avoid, you have to avoid is trans fat. So trans fat is basically fats that have been manipulated by us, by people, in order to make a product more shelf stable. So to make the fat last longer and not go rancid when food sits on a shelf. Trans fats are the ones that are linked to heart disease. They're linked to all of the negative repercussions, increasing your bad cholesterol, decreasing your good cholesterol, all of the things that we don't want to happen. That is what trans fat does in our bodies. So anytime you see trans fat on a label, you want to as far as you can in the other direction. Other cues that there's trans fats in a product are the words hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated. Those, when you see those in an ingredient list, it's just like, it's one of those, this isn't even a good treat. This is just really bad. Stay far away. Regulatory bodies are in the process of literally banning trans fats. So really, really, really important to stay away from those. Okay, moving on. So the rest of the fats, there is deep fried foods. Yeah, Kathy. Hey, Kathy. Yay. I can see comments. Deep fried foods. Exactly. Fast food, deep fried foods. Usually you see it in like bakeries, crackers, cookies, anything like that where they want to keep something on the shelf for a long period of time. Trans fats are going to be found in there. So it's definitely something you want to watch for. It's super important. They cause inflammation. They create a lot of inflammation within your body. So aside from the cardiac issues, if you're just concerned about your weight and how you look, trans fats are going to make you puffy. They're, going to make you hold on to fluid and retain water, and that makes you look bigger than you are. So just stay away from trans fats regardless. PSA, no trans fats. Other foods, good fats. Hi, I came on at 8. I know, I'm sorry. I jumped on early. It was 10 to 8, and my family wasn't home yet from baseball, so I thought I'd get on. Well, it was quiet, and it didn't really work. Kind of backfired because they came home right away after. But anyways, so let's talk about the fats that you want to focus on because people have a hard time adding enough fat into their diet. Rose. So some good sources of fat, if you eat everything. So if you're an omnivore and you do eat meat, you can eat obviously fattier cuts of meat. So going to things like chicken thighs over chicken breasts. Red meat has good quality fat in it. You just want to make sure when you're buying fatty cuts of meat that you're buying good quality, because what happens is toxicity is always stored in fat cells. We as humans do it, other animals do it. So if you're buying lean cuts of meat, it's not as important because you're not getting a lot of the fat. But if you're buying fatty cuts of meat, you're obviously ingesting more of the fat. So you want to make sure the animals that you're eating haven't been storing a whole crap ton of toxins in the fat that you're eating out of them. Hopefully that makes sense. So red meat, fattier cuts of white meat are great places to add fat into your diet. Going from animal products as well, a great way to add good fat into your diet is to use animal fats for cooking. And I know it sounds crazy, and I had a hard time wrapping my head around this as well, but this was done, way back when, and we got away from it. It's not that strange. You can go to a butcher shop and you can buy tallow or you can buy lard, and they are fantastic for cooking your food in. And they give you, again, as long as it's good quality, right? As long as you have a great source who's giving you healthy animal products, then you have all of this great, hard, healthy, saturated fat that you can add into your meals just by cooking. So Those are great sources of fat if you are a meat eater. If you're not a meat eater, fear not, there are lots of other sources of fat. So saturated fat in the plant kingdom comes from coconut oil and palm oil. Coconut oil is obviously the more popular choice because palm oil tends to be very environmentally destructive and also tends to be very, very processed. So unless you can find really good quality sustainable palm oil, which does exist, it tends to be on the pricier side and at health food stores, but it does exist. I tend to focus on coconut oil. Coconut oil is great because it has MCT oils in it as well as lauric acid in it. So those are two different types of fat. MCT oil are basically, they're medium chain triglycerides, and they're a type of fat that specifically digests faster and on a different route than other types of fat do. Gives you increased energy right away. It's great for fat burning, and then the lauric acid that's in coconut oil is amazing for your immune system. So there's a ton of wins with coconut oil, which is why we add it into almost everything. And I definitely suggest that. Another great, and this one is an animal product, so if you're vegan, you're not going to have this. Vegetarian, you probably will, but ghee is fantastic for cooking. It's clarified butter, so it's butter where they've taken all of the proteins out, so it's literally just the fat. You can cook it to very high temperatures, which is wonderful, and it has a really nice kind of buttery flavor when you cook with it, so it's a fantastic source of fat as well. There's a ton of other ways you can add fat. Obviously, olives and olive oil is one of the more popular ways to add fat into your diet. So olives and olive oil are classified as monounsaturated fats. It just basically is a really heart-healthy type of fat. With alongside those things, you can add avocado oil, and avocado is also a fantastic source of fat. Egg yolks, if you eat eggs, are a wonderful source of fat, as well as some nutrients that you don't find in a lot of other things like choline and biotin. So fantastic for your body. If you can eat eggs, I highly suggest that you do. And then we have nuts and seeds, which are, again, a fantastic source of good quality, heart-healthy fats. My favorite would be probably Brazil nuts and macadamia nuts. They have one of the highest fat contents of all of the nuts out there. So those are great sources of fat that you can introduce into your diet. You know, when you're just starting out, even adding things like avocado mayonnaise. If you follow my community on Facebook, if you're a member of that, you know how much I love avocado mayonnaise. I talk about it all the time. It's delicious. You can now buy it at Costco, which was one of the happiest days of my life personally. And what I'll do with avocado mayonnaise is I'll literally just put some in a bowl, add some curry powder or some cumin or some lemon and basil or whatnot, and just make a dip with it, right? And if you can just make a quick dip with that, it makes it so easy to dip veggies in it, or to dip tofu, or to dip meat into it. And it's a great way to just add some fat into whatever you're eating without having to totally rethink the way you cook and eat. Because sometimes it's hard, right? It's hard to change the way you're eating. So I feel like I started talking about fat, and I was, going to give you a quick rundown of all the macronutrients and what they mean, and I got sidetracked, so I apologize. But that is basically some good sources of fat. You can ask me questions if you want. You can ask me what counts as what if you want. You can type whatever you need to in the comments as we go along. Let's move on to protein. Protein is pretty straightforward. Most people know what protein is. Wine break. Most people know what protein is. Protein is important for your hair, it's important for your skin, it's important for your nails, it builds your muscles. Protein is basically the building block within your bodies. And so we get protein from animal sources and we get protein from plant sources. And the protein from animal sources is better absorbed, it's easier for our bodies to use, which is fantastic. Plant sources is a little bit harder for our bodies to use, but we can still use it. From animal sources, it's your meats, your organ meats, your eggs. Dairy has some protein in it. If you can tolerate dairy, that's kind of debatable as to whether it's an ideal protein source for most people. Soybeans, edamame, they have fantastic protein in them. Broccoli has great protein as a plant source. Chickpeas, legumes have good protein as well. So protein is important for all of those building blocks I was talking about, but protein is also, it basically creates something we call thermogenesis when we eat it. And thermogenesis literally just means heat creating. So it's super interesting because when we eat protein, what happens is protein is like super complicated. There's, a ton of different bonds. It's folded a whole bunch of times, and it's basically really hard for your body to break it down. So when you eat protein, what happens is your body has to work really, really hard to digest it, and that's a good thing, right? Because when your body works really hard, it creates heat. And when it creates heat, it's burning more calories, it's increasing your metabolic rate. So the take home here is that you want to eat protein, with every single meal, especially starting from first thing in the morning, because when you eat protein at every single meal, you're always creating this heat, your body's always working harder, and your metabolic rate is always up, more so than it would be if you were eating just carbohydrates or fat. So protein, very important. Protein is pretty straightforward. I mean, we get protein from the meat and the plant sources we talked about. Most people don't have too many questions around protein. It digests a little bit faster than fat does, but slower than carbohydrates do. So whereas fat will take 3 or 4 hours to digest, maybe protein takes 2 or 3 hours to digest, depending on the person. So again, that's going to come into play when we tie this all together at the end and talk about how macros actually affect fat loss and blood sugar, because I think that's going to be the important part. So that is my brief spiel on protein. Again, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the comments. I feel like protein is pretty self-explanatory. So let's move on to carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are probably the most controversial of the macronutrients right now, even more so than fat with everything that's going on, in the media and in the research and all of these things. So carbohydrates are basically your body's preferred energy source because they're easy for your body to use for energy, right? So you're gonna find carbohydrates in kind of the usual suspects, like your bagels and your bread, so grains, but carbohydrates are also found in beans and legumes, and then they're also found in fruits and veggies. So before you say, I've heard all carbohydrates are bad, I'm going low carb, blah, 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 remember that all your vegetables are mainly carbohydrates. That includes your broccoli, that includes your kale, that includes, all of these things that are super nutrient dense powerhouses, right? So it's a little bit more complicated than that. However, that being said, carbohydrates digest the quickest out of all the macronutrients. So they basically can digest in as little as, 45 minutes, an hour, a little bit over that, but they basically move through your body really, really quickly. So when it comes to macronutrients, I hope that gave you a brief overview of fat, carbs, and protein, how they interact, what foods they're found in, and why it matters. Now let's talk about what goes on when you eat them, because this is where you can put it together and you can actually understand why it's so important as to what we're eating when it comes to fat loss, as opposed to how often we're eating or how much we're eating. So, how am I best to explain this? Okay, let's just go through a scenario. This is one of my favorite scenarios. So, first we need a wine break, because this is going to be intense, okay? You guys are ready for this. I think you are. Okay, I'm ready. So let's say you're going out for dinner. It's your grandparents' birthday. You are going out for dinner at a nice pasta restaurant, right? Okay, so at this dinner, you're on a diet. You're looking through the menu and you're going, okay, this is gonna be tough. Italian restaurants, what can I eat that's not gonna blow my diet, make me feel like shit, all of the things. And so you go through the menu and you pick out the healthiest thing on that menu, which in this case is going to be whole grain pasta, pasta primavera. So just some mixed vegetables, a light tomato sauce, and whole grain pasta. Amazing. You're avoiding like the fatty meats, you're avoiding all of those extra calories, you're getting the simplest thing on the menu. Okay, so what's gonna happen when you eat this super healthy meal is that, remember, oh, not now, tell us, we don't need to update our carrier settings. Anyways, so we're eating this super healthy meal, right? And remember how the difference between fat, carbohydrates, and protein comes down to the digestion speed. So all of those things that I just named out, the pasta's carbohydrate, right? The vegetables, carbohydrate, the tomato sauce, carbohydrate. So all carbohydrates right now, okay? So when we eat them, they're all gonna digest really quickly and at the same time, right? Because carbs digest really fast, they don't take very long, and so they're gonna digest all at the same time. And that means they're going to send all of their energy in the form of sugar, because carbohydrates are your body's preferred energy source, right? And that energy is in the form of something called glucose. So they digest really, really quick. They send all of that glucose out into your blood, ready to be used for energy. So what your body does, because all of that sugar is now in the blood, your body sends in insulin. Insulin is like a carrier molecule. So it goes in, it picks up that sugar, and its job is to take that sugar to the muscles, which are working, right? And the muscles can then use that sugar for energy. Great system. However, in this case, you are sitting at an Italian restaurant and you are just hanging out and your muscles aren't working very hard. Or, maybe it's another scenario and you're in your car eating a sandwich. Or maybe you are sitting on your couch eating popcorn, watching Grey's Anatomy, like me. In all of those cases, you're eating straight carbohydrates, right? They're pumping out into your blood really quickly. And so insulin's coming in and grabbing all of that energy all at once, taking it to the working muscles. And the muscles are going, oh, no, like look at all that energy. We're not working that hard. I don't need that energy. And so insulin does what insulin does best, and it stores that energy as fat, because insulin is your fat storage hormone. Not many people know that. Insulin is your fat storage hormone. Super important to understand that point. Super important. So now, not only was all of that healthy meal stored as fat because it digested so quickly and sent all of its energy out at once, and you can't use all that energy out at once. So now it's all stored as fat, but now your blood sugar is too low because it all went out at once and all got pulled at once, and there's nothing else coming, right? Because all the digestion was super quick and at the same time. So now your body is super smart, it's super adaptive, and it wants to bring your blood sugar up. So it's actually going to trigger a carbohydrate craving, a carb craving, right? Because your body knows that carbs are the fastest digesting and they're going to bring your blood sugar up the fastest. So it then becomes, you can see where I'm going with this roller coaster cycle where your blood sugar is up and then it's down and then it's up and then it's down, and you're storing fat all the time. And when you're storing fat all the time, here's the issue. I like to explain to my clients that fat storage and fat burning are two very different one-way streets. You can only be on one at a time. You can't be on both at the same time. So if your blood sugar is always all over the place and your insulin is always spiking, no matter how little you eat, no matter what time of day you eat, that doesn't matter. You are always going to be on the one-way street of fat storing. You're not going to be driving down the street that actually burns fat. I hope that makes sense to you. So if we rewind this scenario and we start again, and say we're at that same restaurant and we're eating according to the way that I eat and the way that I teach my clients to eat. So instead of ordering that pasta primavera with the pasta with the vegetables and the tomato sauce, let's say instead we order, let's say if we're gonna order pasta, we're at an Italian restaurant, so let's say we order pasta. We're gonna order pasta, we're also gonna order a really heavy bolognese meat sauce with it instead. We're gonna have a smaller portion of pasta, a bigger portion of the meat sauce, okay? And so now we're gonna add fat and we're gonna add protein into this picture. And so the digestion looks very different. Instead of it all digesting at once, setting all of its energy out at once, right? And then storing it as fat. Now what's happening is digestion is slowing down. So energy is being sent out in smaller spurts as food is digesting. Less insulin is coming in, picking up less sugar, taking it to the muscles. The muscles are like, oh, well, that's not that much energy. Yeah, I do need some energy just to like sit here and maintain my form and, live. So yeah, we'll take that in. And you're able to actually use that energy, right? And because your digestion is slowing down, it's going slower, it's constantly feeding more into the blood. So you're not ever hitting that low blood sugar, carb craving, awful roller coaster cycle. So I'm hoping that makes sense. I'm just seeing if there's any questions because I know it's kind of complicated and it's kind of hard to explain, but I think I explained it fairly well. So the moral of the story is it doesn't matter what you're eating. It doesn't matter when you're eating or how much you're eating. What matters is what you're eating. That's the important part, because the way food digests directly impacts the hormones that are expressed, which directly impacts whether you are burning fat or whether you are storing fat. And that is why macros are so important. Macros are so important because if you're constantly, creating this environment with high insulin, which is favoring fat storage, you are never going to be able to lose fat. It's just, you can't do it. It's not possible. So with that, I think that is what you need to know to get started on macros. I know I get a lot of questions on macro tracking and how to know how much fat, protein, and carbohydrates you're actually eating. So we're gonna talk about that in the next live, I promise. I may even come on again this week and talk about it if time permits, and all of the dance lessons and soccer and baseball and all the things that we do in the summer allow me to actually get on here. I will, if not, it will be next week. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, please post them in the comments thread on this post. I would love to answer them. I would love to explain it better if there is something you didn't quite understand, or if you want to know something a little bit deeper about one of the macronutrients. I would love to get in there and just explain it even more for you. So I'm happy to answer your questions. Please post them. If you want to know more about macros, every 2 weeks, every second Tuesday, I do a webinar. And we spend an hour kind of deep diving into this, how to use macros for fat loss, how to bust through inflammation, how to create the right environment for fat loss, what exactly to do. So if this is something that really interests you and you're like, hey, this might be the missing link, this might be what's not working for me, then go to my website, www.lavishnutrition.com, and sign up. It's a free webinar. You can hop on. I'll send you some email reminders so you don't forget. And it's a great way to, dive even deeper and ask your questions there. So that is it. Hopefully you guys all had a fantastic night. I know I always love coming on here and chatting, and I always appreciate you, spending time with me, because I know time is very valuable. I want to thank you for showing up. I'm gonna have another sip of my rosé, which again, this is a Spanish rosé Tempranillo Rioja, I believe. It's a 2 grams of sugar per liter, which is amazing. It tastes delicious, and it's about $11.95, so highly recommended. We will talk soon. Have a fantastic night, everyone.